Imagine standing waist deep in a muddy, serpentine river. It's 1930s New Guinea,
Right.
and the air around you is just thick,
Yeah.
like almost gelatinous with the heat.
Oh, absolutely suffocating.
Yeah, exactly. The humidity is so intense, it feels like you're breathing underwater even before you actually submerge.
Mm-hmm.
And your pockets are completely filled with heavy river stones.
Which is such a striking image.
It really is. They clack against your thighs, just this blunt, heavy rhythm as you wade deeper into the current.
Right, because you are a highly educated Western scientist. You were sent halfway across the globe to decode the mysteries of human civilization.
Right, but right now your only objective, your single driving purpose, is to sink to the bottom of this river and never come back up.
You hold your breath, you let the murky water rush over your head, and you just wait for the end.
It's a terrifyingly calm moment of surrender. But of course, the river doesn't take him.
No, it doesn't. Because instead of that quiet fate of death, you feel these rough, calloused hands grabbing your shoulders. Yeah, you are hauled out of the water, dragged onto the muddy bank, and pounded like a sago pancake until you cough up half the river.
That's intense.
And then as you're lying there gasping, you get scolded.
Scolded, like by the people who saved you.
Exactly. Not gently comforted, not treated like a psychiatric emergency. The native tribesmen scold you. They are laughing uproariously at you, pointing at the heavy stones.
Like you're a little kid or something.
Treating you like a foolish toddler and lecturing you about how incredibly dangerous it is to go swimming while wearing all your clothes.
That image is just brilliant. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
Today we are exploring the profound, messy, and honestly devastating world of Lily King's acclaimed novel, Euphoria.
It's such a layered book.
It totally is. And to give you some context right out of the gate, this text is a fictionalized account, but it is deeply anchored in a very real, very famous historical encounter.
Right, the 1933 meeting on the Sepik River.
Exactly. Between three towering figures of early anthropology. Margaret Mead, her husband Rio Fortune, and the British anthropologist Gregory Bateson.
Though in the pages of King's novel, they are reimagined as Nell Stone, Schuyler Fenwick, who just goes by Fen, and Andrew Bankson.
Right. So while the names have been altered, the foundational mission of our deep dive today is to extract the incredible insights this text offers about human nature.
Because, this isn't just a story about scientists looking at indigenous tribes.
No, not at all.
It's really about how the act of studying so-called primitive cultures actually acts as this massive, unforgiving mirror.
Oh, I like that way of putting it.
Yeah, it forces these characters, and frankly, anyone reading it or listening to us right now, to confront the darkest, most possessive and destructive instincts of our own modern Western society.
Completely. We're going to look at the agonizing physical cost of ambition.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to completely dismantle the illusion of scientific objectivity.
Well, totally.
And we're going to trace exactly how a revolutionary, paradigm-shifting theory of human temperament was born out of a deeply toxic, agonizingly brilliant love triangle.
It's a journey that moves from absolute physical devastation to the highest peaks of intellectual discovery, and then, well, it plummets into a devastating betrayal.
Yeah, it really takes a dark turn. We'll start by examining the horrific physical and mental state our three main characters are in when they meet.
Which is rough.
So rough.
Yeah.
Then we'll explore their violently opposed methods of studying humanity, break down the brilliant psychological framework they invent, which they call the grid.
Right.
And finally, we'll examine the destructive climax that leaves their lives in ruins.
So let's start with that physical devastation, because we really need to understand the bloody beginnings of this story.
Yeah, bloody is the right word. We meet Nell Stone and her husband Fen when they are quite literally fleeing for their lives downriver from a tribe called the Mumbanyo.
And fleeing doesn't even quite capture the desperation.
No, it doesn't. I mean, the physical description of Nell in these opening pages is just shocking.
Yeah, she is suffering from malarial eyes.
Meaning her vision is actually warped by the disease.
Right. She is covered in tropical lesions that are stinging and weeping in the wind. She has a fresh, infected gash on her hand from a sago palm thorn.
Ugh, that sounds so painful.
And she's nursing a weak ankle from an old sprain where she had to be carried upside down on a pole by native porters for days.
Just a total physical collapse.
She is wearing filthy, oversized men's pajamas because her own clothes have literally rotted off her body.
Wow.
And to top it all off, her glasses are broken.
And the text makes a very specific note of how they broke, right?
It does. They were broken by her husband, Fen.
That detail about the glasses is doing so much heavy lifting.
Oh, absolutely.
It immediately establishes a dynamic of profound physical vulnerability. But it also signals subtle or, perhaps entirely overt spousal abuse.
Right. Her literal ability to see the world, which is her primary tool as an observer, has been fractured by the man who is supposed to be her partner.
Which is just so tragic when you think about it. But to fully grasp the tension between them, we have to look at why they are running.
Right, the Mombano.
Yeah. Nell is a character defined by an almost radical empathy. She desperately wants to understand people. But the Mumbanya tribe has essentially broken her spirit.
The culture of the Mombano is described as fiercely aggressive.
Like bordering on a collective paranoia.
Exactly. Nell documents how they practice casual infanticide. She talks about counting the dead babies she's seen.
Tossed into the river, left in the bush to die of exposure.
It's horrific. If a baby is considered an inconvenience, or if a man even slightly suspects the child isn't his, they just dispose of it without a second thought.
I mean, how do you even process that as an observer?
We really can't. She also notes a deeply ingrained culture of abuse, where fathers begin sexually abusing their young daughters when the girls are just 7 or 8 years old.
It's sickening. For Nell, studying them isn't just an academic challenge. It induces a violent physical repulsion.
And to add a layer of sheer terror to the situation, the Mombano are blaming all of their recent bad luck on a government mandate that recently banned homicide.
Wait, they banned homicide and they made them mad.
Yeah. They are a ticking time bomb of suppressed violence, furious that they can no longer kill their neighbors.
When you look at this through the lens of early 20th century anthropology, it completely shatters that romanticized Jean-Jacques Rousseau myth of the noble savage living in perfect harmony with nature.
Totally. Nell is confronted with a society whose fundamental norms violate her deepest, most intrinsic moral compass.
It brings up such an agonizing question for you as a listener. How do you objectively document a culture when every fiber of your being is screaming in moral outrage?
You really have to detach, which is almost impossible. But what makes the situation truly volatile is her husband's reaction.
Right, Finn.
Fenn is exposed to the exact same environment, the exact same atrocities, and he isn't repulsed at all.
He isn't.
No, he is enamored by it.
It's almost a perverse reaction.
Very perverse. Where Nell sees trauma and a society eating itself alive, Fenn sees a playground.
He absolutely loves the savagery.
Ugh.
While Nell is recoiling in horror, Finn is diving headfirst into the violence.
He even goes on a 10-day hunting expedition with the Mombano warriors.
And he secretly tastes human flesh, right?
Yes. He comes back to their camp, looks at his wife, and casually blurts out that the natives are right. Human flesh tastes like old pig.
Wow, that is so deeply messed up.
It's this grotesque, chilling detail that highlights a fundamental chasm in how Fenn and Nell engage with the world.
Nell wants to map the emotional structure of his society, but Fenn wants to consume it.
Exactly. He wants to ingest its most taboo elements just to prove how fearless he is.
That profound disconnect between husband and wife, layered on top of the absolute physical devastation of their bodies, leaves them incredibly raw.
They are failing professionally and collapsing personally.
Which brings us to the third point of our triangle.
The English anthropologist Andrew Bankson.
Right. We met him in the river with the stones in his pockets earlier.
Yes. Bankson is stationed on a different part of the Sepik River, studying a tribe called the Kiona.
And he is experiencing a completely different, yet equally paralyzing kind of agony.
Bankson is drowning in grief and isolation long before he actually steps into that river.
We get this rich backstory about his family back in England. They are a dynasty of imposing scientists.
His father was utterly obsessed with genetics, spending his life breeding peas and incubating eggs, measuring every single variable of life.
Bankson was raised on the scientific method the way other people are raised on religious dogma.
Right. He was taught that the only meaning in life is to categorize and understand the natural world.
But his family has been entirely decimated.
It's so sad. His older brother, John, who was a brilliant naturalist, was blown to bits in the mud of World War I.
And his other brother, Martin, who was a sensitive poet and absolutely hated science, committed a very public, gruesome suicide.
Yeah, in Piccadilly Circus, over unrequited love, shooting himself in the ear.
The weight of that backstory is just crushing.
It really is. It reframes Bankson's entire presence in New Guinea.
He is out there ostensibly doing important field work, collecting data for the university, but in reality, He is in exile.
He is fleeing the suffocating expectations of his overbearing mother and the lingering ghosts of his dead brothers.
But as the old saying goes, wherever you go, there you are. You cannot outrun your own mind.
Bankson finds himself in a state of total academic and personal stagnation.
He has been out in the bush for years. He feels his research is entirely meaningless, and the profound, echoing isolation has driven him to the brink of insanity.
And that leads him to fill his pockets with stones.
He actually describes feeling strangely buoyant as he walks into the water because, for the first time in months, he has a clear purpose.
It's a dark realization the misery receives when you finally make a plan, even if that plan is your own death.
He even has this morbidly detached thought about how crocodiles are sacred to the Keona tribe.
Oh, yeah, he muses that maybe he'll become part of their local mythology.
Right. The unhappy white man who was eaten by the river gods.
But as we discussed at the start, the Keona completely refuse to let him become a tragic myth.
They drag him out and laugh at him.
And that laughter is crucial. It strips away the romantic tragedy of his suicide attempt and replaces it with sheer, unadulterated embarrassment.
It forces him out of his own head.
Exactly. The humiliation is so acute that it compels him to get in his boat and travel to the government station in Angorem.
Right, to attend a Christmas Eve party with the other Western colonials, simply because he cannot bear to be alone with himself for one more night. Wait, I'm trying to visualize this whole era of science, and it's completely blowing my mind.
How so?
Well, we have this culturally ingrained image of 1930s science as being very sterile. We picture men in crisp white coats taking precise measurements in pristine laboratories.
Oh, sure.
But looking at these three, 1930s anthropology was basically extreme wilderness survivalism mixed with a PhD.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I mean, how can anyone possibly claim to be an objective observer of humanity when they are battling cerebral malaria, stepping over discarded infants, and fighting off suicidal depression in the mud?
That is precisely the paradox the author is highlighting. The illusion of scientific objectivity is constantly violently undermined by the physical and psychological realities of the scientists themselves.
You cannot separate the observer from the observed.
Exactly. The data you collect is inevitably filtered through your own trauma, your fever, your exhaustion, and your grief.
And it is exactly this intense physical and mental vulnerability, this absolute rock-bottom desperation that all three of them are experiencing that creates the perfect storm for what happens next.
Bankson is essentially a drowning man who has just been pulled from the river, starved for intellectual connection.
And when he walks into that Angorem club on Christmas Eve, he accidentally bumps into Nell and Fen.
The scene at the Angorem Club is a brilliant collision of worlds.
You have the motorboat arriving with these wealthy Westerners, gold prospectors, colonial overseers.
Women dressed in stiff formal dresses, silk stockings, and pearls, sweating in the jungle heat.
They're drinking gin, complaining about the natives, gossiping about society.
And then you have Nell and Fen boarding the boat to join them.
Nell is wearing Fen's dirty pajamas. She's visibly limping. She's covered in scabs and sores.
The society women look at her with profound pity. They think she's just this battered, pathetic creature who has been dragged into the jungle by her husband.
But the dramatic irony here is exquisite because Nell holds massive, hidden intellectual weight.
Oh, she's brilliant.
The society women are sitting there casually gossiping about a scandalous, best-selling book regarding the sex lives of native teenagers in the Solomon Islands.
And they are completely unaware that the battered woman sitting quietly across from them is the actual author.
Right. Nell possesses a towering intellect that has rocked the Western world, but physically she is so diminished she looks, as Bankson later describes her, like a small, sickly marsupial.
So Bankson is standing at the club, recovering from his suicide attempt just days prior, and he sees Fen.
Who he vaguely remembers from years ago at Cambridge, right?
Yes. Fen introduces his wife, Nell, and Bankson's reaction is instantaneous, visceral, and overwhelming.
He sees this brilliant, exhausted woman with her smoke-colored eyes, and he sees Fen's aggressive, almost cruel posturing beside her.
Bankson's internal monologue is just a heartbeat of pure, unadulterated need.
He literally thinks, "Whap, whap, I need you. I need you."
It is a profound recognition of a peer. Bankson has been intellectually starved for years.
He has been writing desperate letters to his university in England, begging for a partner, for someone to bounce ideas off of, but no one wants to come to his remote territory.
Suddenly, here are two highly trained anthropologists right in front of him.
But there is a massive obstacle.
Fen and Nell announce that because of their catastrophic failure with the Mumbanyo, they are abandoning New Guinea entirely.
They are heading to Australia the very next morning to study the Aborigines instead.
Bankson panics. The thought of losing them, of having this intellectual lifeline dangled in front of him only to have it snatched away.
Forcing him to go back to his isolated village alone.
Right, it is unbearable. So he does something incredibly territorial, though he frames it as a grand gesture of generosity.
He essentially bribes them to stay.
Anthropologists in this era were fiercely protective of their tribes. They viewed these living, breathing communities as personal property, their territory.
Yeah, that colonial mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Bankson has a massive area of the Sepik River all to himself. He tells them, "Do not leave because of me. I will find you a tribe tomorrow."
He offers them a nearby tribe, the Tam, located on a lake just a few hours away.
He gives away his hard-won monopoly on the region just to keep these two minds close to him.
And they accept. They are just as desperate for a professional win as he is for company.
What follows is this incredibly evocative, sensory-rich boat ride in Bankson's motorized war canoe.
They travel through the night to Bankson's village, Nengai.
The text meticulously describes passing through dense swaths of fireflies that make it feel like they're soaring through a galaxy of stars.
You hear the distant, rhythmic thud of tribal drums over the water, the smell of roasted boar wafting from the shore.
It is an immersion that immediately strips away the stiff, gin-soaked pretenses of the Western club they just left.
They arrive at Bankson's house, which sounds like something out of a dream.
It's built completely around a massive, living rainbow gum tree that comes up right through the floorboards and exits through the thatched roof.
And the moment Nell walks in, she doesn't collapse on a bed, even though she's exhausted, injured, and recovering from malaria.
Right, she immediately gravitates toward Bankson's chaotic workroom.
She sees his messy field notes, the typewriter, the scattered papers, and she zeroes in on a problem Bankson has been completely stuck on for months.
The mango leaves.
Yes. Bankson has observed that the Kiona tribe places mango leaves on graves in highly specific, intricate patterns, but he cannot figure out the underlying logic or syntax of the ritual.
Nell looks at his scattered notes for perhaps 5 minutes and immediately starts rattling off variables he hadn't considered.
Age, sex, social status, mode of death, shape of the moon, position of the stars, birth order.
She isn't just reading notes, she is an absolute machine of analytical processing.
Bankson is stunned. He's been staring at this puzzle until his eyes bled for months. And she walks in, glances at it, and immediately sees the matrix.
And Fenn's reaction from the other room is so telling.
He cackles and yells out, "Didn't take you long this time. Shall we make a pyre of all his notes?"
It's phrased as a joke, but it's laced with a deep, toxic venom.
If we pause to analyze this immediate dynamic, you can see the architecture of a powder keg of codependency forming.
You have Bankson, who is starved for intellectual peers, profoundly depressed, and now awestruck.
You have Fenn, who is highly intelligent but undisciplined, deeply competitive, and growing increasingly resentful of his wife's fame and her effortless natural talent.
And you have Nell, who is a pure, empathetic processor of information.
Driven by a desperate need to understand the world, but physically fragile and trapped in a marriage that is becoming increasingly punitive.
They are perfectly fulfilling each other's deepest lacks, which is exactly what makes the triangle so volatile.
Bankson thinks he saved himself by keeping them close, but proximity just exposes the cracks in Nell and Fenn's marriage.
And the second they start working with the Tam tribe, you see that their marital conflict isn't just a personal grievance.
No, it's entirely rooted in their violently opposing philosophies of how to extract truth from another human being.
Bankson secures their presence, sets them up with the Tam, and leaves them to work. But watching them operate brings us to a massive question.
How do you actually study a human?
Exactly. It's the central methodological debate of the deep dive. How do you, as an outsider, extract authentic truth from a culture that is not your own?
Nell's approach is methodical, deeply empathetic, and highly structured, yet entirely responsive to the people themselves.
She establishes a predictable routine. She holds daily office hours on the veranda of her house.
The Tam people come to her. They come to draw, to talk, to trade items, or just to observe her.
She creates a safe, neutral space where they feel comfortable approaching her on their own terms.
And she uses tools to bridge the communication gap.
This part fascinated me. She uses Rorschach ink blots.
Those symmetrical ink smudges used by psychiatrists?
Finn had actually studied psychology back in Europe and brought the kid along, but he got bored and abandoned them.
Nell picks them up and uses them to elicit cultural truths. She sits with the Tam and simply asks them what they see in the abstract shapes.
When Bangson visits her, she playfully tests him, and Bangson looks at the classic card, usually associated with sex or intimacy, and he says he sees elephants in large boots.
Nell just smiles and notes that his biology background makes his answers highly abnormal compared to a typical Westerner.
It's a funny, lighthearted moment, but it shows how brilliantly she uses Western psychiatric tools to measure non-Western minds.
And in doing so reveals the quirks of the Western mind itself. Let's unpack the mechanics of that for a moment because it's vital.
Yeah, how does an anthropologist translate an inkblot into cultural data?
Nell isn't looking for individual psychological diagnoses like a Western therapist would. She is looking for statistical consensus.
Ah, I see.
If 80% of the Tam look at a specific shape and see a pregnant crocodile, while 80% of Westerners see a dancing couple, Nell can correlate that data to understand the foundational imagery that anchors the Tam's collective subconscious.
She is mapping the architecture of their shared reality.
And beyond the tools, her method relies on this radical, almost dangerous level of empathy.
There is an incredible, powerful scene where she is interviewing a Tam man named Chanta.
Through gentle, persistent, almost therapeutic questioning over many sessions, she coaxes him to reveal a deeply suppressed childhood trauma.
He confesses that as a young boy, he accidentally witnessed his mother and other women wearing penis cords during a secret, highly taboo transvestite ceremony.
He had been so terrified by this aggressive gender reversal that he ran away into the jungle and buried the memory for decades.
Nell doesn't just record the fact of the ceremony. She records the visceral emotion of the man remembering it.
Her field notes start reading more like avant-garde poetry to capture the raw feeling of the moment.
She types disjointed phrases like concentration, tenderness, love, peace, pieta, entirely discarding punctuation, grammar, and margins to capture the human experience.
She is attempting to dissolve the barrier between herself and her subject through profound emotional resonance.
But then you look at Fenn.
Fenn's method is a dark, chaotic mirror to Nell's.
Fenn doesn't want to sit behind a desk and study the natives like specimens. He wants to be one.
He completely abandons his notebooks. While Nell is patiently holding office hours and showing ink blots, Fenn is out in the bush, physically immersing himself in the most extreme, visceral aspects of Tam culture.
His immersion is aggressive. He undergoes agonizing tribal scarification.
He has cuts made from his shoulder all the way down to his wrist.
And he deliberately allows them to become infected to create the raised, permanent bumps that signify a warrior.
He participates in the men's secret ceremonies where he dances naked, wearing the ceremonial penis cords, mirroring the aggressive sexual pantomimes of the tribe.
He consumes whatever roots or hallucinogens the Tam offer him, returning home completely out of his mind.
Covered in rancid pig oil and mud, claiming he has been communicating with Jesus, his long-dead ancestors, and random figures from his past.
He comes back to the house high out of his mind, smelling putrid, and he sees Nell calmly typing up her notes. And he just snaps.
He tells her the sound of that machine is the sound of your brain.
And he shoves her typewriter off the desk, snapping the silver arm. It's an act of pure violence against her intellect.
It is a profound manifestation of his insecurity, but it also raises a crucial epistemological question about anthropology itself.
Wait, I'm struggling to completely condemn Fenn here, even though he's obviously being abusive.
Let's hear it.
I mean, Nell is sitting behind a desk, handing out Western ink blots, staying relatively clean. Fenn is actually bleeding with the tribe, sweating with him in the dirt, taking their drugs, feeling the exact pain of the scarification.
That's true.
Isn't Fenn's chaotic physical immersion actually a closer approximation to the reality of the tribe than Nell's sterile office hours? Doesn't he know something she can never know because he felt it in his own flesh?
It is the eternal debate of the participant-observer model.
Right.
Fenn's argument is that true understanding requires the dissolution of the self into the group, mind, the collective id of the tribe.
He thinks Nell is detached.
He believes Nell's method is sterile, that it maintains an artificial colonial barrier between the superior observer and the inferior subject.
What does it?
Well, the text masterfully suggests that Fenn's immersion is actually a form of deep cowardice and escape.
Escape from what?
He isn't trying to understand the Tam. He is using their rituals to obliterate his own feelings of inadequacy and his deep-seated resentment toward Western society's expectations of him.
Oh, wow. I get that.
His authenticity is ultimately selfish because it produces no synthesis, no shared knowledge, no framework to help the world understand the Tam.
It only produces personal intoxication and violence toward his wife. He is basically a tourist of their pain.
That distinction is so clarifying. He's using their culture as a drug to escape himself, not as a text to read.
And because Fenn is out physically losing his mind in the bush for days on end, Nell and Bangson are left alone at the camp.
They spend long days together while Fenn is recovering from his wounds or off hunting.
And this quiet, intense intellectual intimacy between Nell and Bangson culminates in a massive, paradigm-shifting breakthrough.
This breakthrough is the intellectual climax of the narrative, and it requires a bit of historical context to fully appreciate.
It is catalyzed by the arrival of the mailboat. Nell receives a manuscript from her close friend and former lover, Helen.
Now, Helen is a character clearly modeled on the legendary real-life anthropologist Ruth Benedict.
Helen's manuscript is an absolute bombshell for the 1930s. It argues forcefully for a concept we now call cultural relativism.
Let's frame why this was so explosive.
In the 1930s, the prevailing Western belief, backed by mainstream science and the terrifying rise of the eugenics movement in Europe, was that Western white civilization was the absolute pinnacle of human evolution.
Right. Every other culture was viewed as a stepping stone, a primitive past that the West had triumphantly evolved beyond.
Helen's manuscript completely obliterates that idea.
She argues that the entire spectrum of human potential is like a great sweeping arc, and every single culture simply selects a few traits from that arc to emphasize, while discarding or suppressing others.
Exactly. They sit down and read this manuscript together, feverishly, passing the pages back and forth.
And the implications are staggering.
Helen points out that what the West considers completely abnormal or even criminal, like homosexuality or falling into spiritual trance states, is revered as holy, ideal, or essential in other cultures.
She notes that in ancient Greece, homosexuality was tied to the highest ideals of the good life. In the Middle Ages, falling into a trance made you a venerated saint.
But in the 1930s West, possessing those exact same traits will get you locked in an insane asylum or chemically castrated.
It completely shatters the deeply ingrained idea that Western morality is the default biological setting of humanity.
Reading this acts as a catalyst for Nell, Bangson, and eventually Fenn, who returns and joins them.
They stay up all night, fueled by adrenaline, intellectual euphoria, and whatever local fermented brew Fenn has brought back.
And they invent something they call the grid.
They literally take a piece of paper and draw a large cross on it to map out cultural and individual temperaments based on these dominant traits Helen described.
Let's break down the mechanics of how they construct this grid, because it is a fascinating piece of sociological architecture.
They create a compass of human personality.
At the North, they place traits that are aggressive, possessive, achievement-oriented, and heavily egoistic.
They immediately map the violent Mumbanyo tribe here. Bangson places his demanding, overbearing English mother here.
And it is entirely unspoken, but painfully obvious to everyone in the room that Fenn belongs in the extreme North.
At the South, they map the exact opposite. Traits that are caring, responsive, yielding, and deeply empathetic.
They map the gentle Anapa tribe here. Nell and Bangson clearly identify themselves with the South.
To the West, they map traits that are pragmatic, managerial, linear, and binary black and white thinking.
This is the realm of Western colonialism, bureaucracy, and industrial capitalism.
And finally, to the East, they map the creative, spiritual, artistic, and nonconformist traits.
They place the Tam tribe here, along with Bangson's suicidal poet brother, Martin.
The mapping is brilliant, but what elevates the grid from a fun late-night sorting exercise to a profound anthropological insight is their realization about gender dynamics within these cultures.
They realize that while a culture might have a dominant trait, say, a highly aggressive northern culture like the Mumbanyo, the women within that culture often offset the ideal.
They act, as Nell calls it, as a built-in thermostat.
It's an incredibly apt mechanical metaphor.
If a society's engine runs entirely on hyper-aggressive northern masculinity, it will eventually overheat and destroy itself through endless warfare and violence.
Nell realizes the women in these tribes act like a radiator. They develop hyper-pragmatic or yielding traits specifically to absorb and cool off that male aggression.
Keeping the societal engine from exploding, the culture survives because the genders adopt opposing roles on the grid to maintain a tense equilibrium.
I love that engine analogy. It makes so much sense. It's like they've decoded human nature.
Yes, but
But at the same time, I look at this and see a massive danger.
how do you mean?
It is so intoxicating to think you've solved the puzzle of humanity. But when you start categorizing people and entire cultures, so rigidly pinning them onto a literal graph,
Yeah.
You risk locking them into boxes they can't escape.
It's like a high-stakes cultural Myers-Briggs test.
Exactly. You reduce complex, messy living societies into static data points.
You've hit on the exact flaw of their era of anthropology.
And while Nell and Bankson experienced this charting exercise as a moment of pure intellectual liberation, a shared euphoria of the mind for Fenn, the experience rapidly sours.
Fenn realizes that he cannot compete with Nell and Bankson on this intellectual plane.
He can't synthesize data and map the mind the way they do.
He feels utterly inadequate, exposed as a fraud in front of his wife and his rival.
And because his temperament is deeply, intrinsically northern, aggressive, competitive, driven by possession, he makes a fatal calculation.
He decides that if he cannot secure his legacy through intellectual synthesis, he must steal something physical to prove his dominance.
And the transition from the high of intellectual discovery to the low of physical theft drives us right into the tragic climax of this deep dive.
Fenn decides to steal.
But before we get to the actual theft, we have to look closely at the concept of possession itself.
Because Nell lays out a philosophy of love to Bankson that foreshadows everything that is about to go wrong.
She talks about love as wine versus love as bread.
It is a striking melancholic metaphor that Nell borrows from an Amy Lowell poem.
Nell explains that wine represents a love that is intoxicating, free, and unpossessive. It is experienced entirely in the moment.
You enjoy the wine, but you don't seek to own the vineyard.
Bread, on the other hand, is a daily staple. It is heavy, it is necessary for survival, and crucially, it is possessed.
It is property. It is hoarded.
Think about how we navigate relationships, even today. How often do you meet someone who feels like wine-free, exciting, intoxicating, but within a month or two, you or they are trying to turn it into bread?
You want to put labels on it, track their location on your phone, define the parameters, own their time.
Nell tells Bankson that she is always wine to people at first, but they quickly treat her as bread they want to own her, to consume her intellect, to cage her.
She identifies this as a deeply Western Northern obsession.
Western culture is built entirely on the concept of private property, on owning land, owning resources, extracting wealth, and eventually owning people.
And this philosophy perfectly explains the horrific action Fenn is about to take.
Enter Zambun. Zambun is a Tam native who has just returned to the village after spending several years working in Western-run gold mines.
Essentially acting as indentured labor under brutal colonial conditions.
But Zambun brings something back with him. He brings a sacred ancestral tribal flute.
And Fenn, ever the opportunist, discovers that this flute has primitive logograms, actual physical writing carved into the wood.
We really need to underline the historical weight of this. Finding logograms on a flute in this region is a massive, earth-shattering anthropological discovery.
No system of written language had ever been found among the tribes of the Sepik River.
Fenn realizes instantly that whoever brings this flute back to a museum in London or New York will be famous forever.
It's the equivalent of finding a new Rosetta Stone.
He excitedly tells Bankson they could be like Howard Carter discovering King Tut's tomb. He sees a shortcut to the immortality he couldn't achieve through intellect.
So Fenn begins secretly plotting with Zambun.
Zambun wants to leave the village again, perhaps to escape a complicated local entanglement or the pressure of returning home, and Fenn sees his opportunity.
Under the cover of darkness, Fenn takes Bankson's motorized canoe, effectively stranding Bankson and Nell with no way to communicate with the outside world, steals the sacred flute, and flees down the river.
The consequences are immediate, and they are utterly devastating. The Tam tribe realizes the sacred flute is gone.
But they don't blame the white men. They blame Zambun, the man who brought it back and was seen consorting with Fenn.
The enraged tribe turns on Zambun and murders him. They literally tear him apart in the village.
And when Bankson finally manages to get a boat, catches up with Fenn in Sydney, Australia, and confronts him about the murder, Fenn's reaction is absolutely chilling.
He doesn't care. He justifies the death of a human being by saying, "Natives kill natives."
He looks at Bankson and says, "The flute is not exactly the frieze of the Parthenon, and nobody cared how Elgin got that, except for a few sentimental Greeks."
That statement is the ultimate sickening distillation of colonial hypocrisy.
Fenn justifies the theft and the resulting murder of an innocent man by downgrading the value of the very culture he spent a year studying.
When it suits his ambition, the flute is the greatest discovery in the history of anthropology, his ticket to fame.
But when it requires moral accountability, it's just a piece of primitive wood from a savage tribe, not the Parthenon.
He was perfectly happy to map out the beauty of these cultures on the grid. But in practice, his northern instinct to possess, conquer, and extract wealth, destroys the very people he claims to revere.
It's extraction, pure and simple. Anthropology as mining.
He is no different than the corporate colonial bosses who send Zambun to the gold mines in the first place. He's just extracting cultural capital instead of gold.
And this horrific betrayal forces them all to flee New Guinea in absolute disgrace.
They end up in Australia, leading to a final suffocating confrontation that changes everything.
The atmosphere at the Black Opal Hotel in Sydney is incredibly tense and oppressive.
The humid, vibrant, overwhelming life of the Sepik River has been replaced by the stark, cold, consumerist reality of a Western city.
The walls feel like they are closing in. Bankson, who is entirely desperately in love with Nell by this point, begs her to leave Fenn.
He pleads with her to run away with him, to escape the sociopath who just caused a murder and stranded them.
But Nell refuses.
And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
She is utterly broken by the guilt of Zambun's death.
Even though she didn't steal the flute, she feels entirely responsible because her presence, their Western funding, their arrogant interference set the stage for it to happen.
She tells Bankson, "I'm going to try and fix what I can."
It's a tragic, extreme South Quadrant response.
She yields to the overwhelming responsibility she feels, sacrificing her own happiness, her love for Bankson, and ultimately her safety to try and manage Fenn.
Meanwhile, Fenn is just gloating. He actually shows Bankson the stolen flute hidden under his hotel bed like a trophy.
Proving once and for all that he views their entire field of study merely as a vehicle for his own status.
And from there, the narrative moves swiftly to its tragic end. Nell and Fenn board the SS Calgaric bound for New York.
Through a brief, gut-wrenching flash-forward, we learn the ultimate fate of the characters.
Nell does not survive the journey. She dies at sea.
It is heavily, darkly implied, given Fenn's escalating history of physical violence, his jealousy, and his desperate need to own her legacy, that she is either thrown overboard or driven to her death by him.
And Fenn, he completely vanishes from the historical record.
The man who stole a sacred object and caused a murder to guarantee his eternal fame is swallowed by absolute anonymity. He is forgotten.
It's a chilling, haunting end for them, but Bankson survives.
Bankson takes a long, lonely boat ride back to England, and on that ship, to save his own sanity, to make sure the euphoria they shared wasn't for nothing, he writes up the grid theory.
He publishes the monograph, and crucially, he puts all three of their names on it.
He preserves Nell's genius for the world.
And the story ends years later, with Bankson as an old man, walking through a museum display honoring Nell's incredible legacy.
He's looking at all these artifacts they collected, masks, spears, woven baskets, but his eyes catch on one specific tiny item in the corner of a glass case.
It's a cheap button with pale blue threads still attached. It's a button from the very dress Nell was wearing when they were briefly, passionately together.
It is a profound, beautifully quiet, concluding image. They spent their entire lives traveling the globe, enduring malaria, violence, and madness.
Studying the sacred objects of other cultures, trying to understand how a piece of carved wood or a painted mask can hold the spiritual meaning of an entire tribe.
And in the end, Banks's most sacred object isn't a mask or a logogram flute. It's just a cheap, mass-produced blue button in a glass case.
But to him, it holds all of his grief, his love, and his history. It is his totem.
So if we look back at the entirety of this deep dive, what is the core takeaway from Euphoria?
The novel uses the historical lens of 1930s anthropology to hold a mirror directly up to us.
It demonstrates that true understanding of another person or another culture requires profound empathy, that southern yielding rather than the northern desire to possess, define, extract, or control.
It brings us right back to the grid. And you, listening to this right now, have to ask yourself, where do you fall on that grid?
In your workplace, in your relationships, in your family, are you northern, driven by achievement, competition, and possession?
Are you Eastern, seeking spiritual meaning at the expense of practicality?
And how might your own dominant traits be acting as blinders, preventing you from seeing the actual messy reality of the people around you?
It is incredibly easy to look back at these 1930s anthropologists and judge them.
We judge their colonial hubris, their destructive, arrogant methods, and their incredibly toxic personal lives.
We judge Fenn for stealing a physical artifact to boost his own ego and justify a murder. We feel superior to them.
But think about how you interact with the world today. When you scroll through social media, consuming endless snippets of other people's lives, other cultures, other tragedies, just for your own entertainment, or to curate your own feed, or to feel informed, are you really seeking to understand them?
Or are we all just modern-day explorers, extracting digital artifacts to build our own personal museums?
Imagine standing in that muddy river again, the heavy stones in your pockets clacking against your legs. Are you observing the water, or are you just trying to own it? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.